Pharma Ventures, experts in deals and alliances.
Welcome to PharmaTelevision News Review. With me today is Steve Bates, the CEO of the UK's BioIndustry Association. Steve, welcome.
Hello.
Hi. Well, welcome to the programme. It's been a while since you've been here, and I also notice it's just coming up for your 2 years as CEO at the BIA. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what's been happening in the last year and some of the positive initiatives that are going on at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, we've focused on two things really at the BIA this year. One is the need for access to finance for UK biotech companies, and we've also focused on regulatory reform and changing the rules of the game, if you like, for drug development and drug discovery. I think on access to finance, we've seen a real sea change in the last 12 months. It's fantastic to see UK companies getting public market listings on the UK Stock Exchange, Circassia being the obvious and big example here. A number of others on the junior market in the UK, AIM, have gone to market, so that's great. And we're also seeing a number of funders who fund private companies, having done very well in the last couple of years, looking for new investments, and many of those are making investments in UK-based companies at a private level, smaller than the big public fundings, but that's coming through and that's moving very swiftly. I think on the other side, we're delighted to have worked very closely with regulators both at the UK level, the MHRA, and a European level, the EMA, based in London, of course. At the European level, there's an adaptive licensing pilot programme which was launched 2 months ago, and at the UK level, there's a complementary scheme called the Early Access Scheme, which brings together the regulator, the MHRA, NICE, the HTA agency, and the NHS, the payer in the UK, which looks to make that practical, an adaptive approach in the UK.
So who's going to benefit from the changes in these regulatory schemes? Is it patients? Is it companies?
I hope both patients and companies will benefit from a scheme that makes things faster, simpler, hopefully cheaper. I think if I can go into a little bit of the detail of the schemes, I think the core idea here is that regulators have understood that that there's a whole load of data that's now available to them, and perhaps they've been focused in the past on the best quality data in randomised control trials, and where that's not been available perhaps in orphan drug situations, they've looked for expert views, but they realise that there's a whole range of other data, particularly in a big data environment, which is in the olden days perhaps considered second class or dirty data, that there is some value in looking at, and they're changing their mind as to how they might integrate and look at that continuum of data in making an evaluation, particularly if they can look again at it at a further stage down. That's really the adaptive licensing approach. And what's happened is that after some blockages at a European level, the EMA have developed some pilots in the last couple of months. We've seen a number of companies approach the EMA, put candidate drugs into this process, having a safe harbour discussion with the EMA, and I think there are a number of innovators there who may find a new path to market, a new way to bring their drugs forward, which could have significant benefits in speeding the process up for patients, which is the ultimate point.
Can you give us any idea of the numbers of companies that are now trying to take advantage of this process?
I think as of this week it's more than 10 and less than 20, but this is a continuous process, and I think that's quite enlightening within only 2 months of the scheme being open.
Right, you mentioned the EMA. Are there particular parts of Europe that are going to benefit more than others from these new initiatives?
I think, as with all initiatives at a European Medicines Agency level, because they have to partner with national regulators, national payers, national HTA agencies, there are some that are at the front of the pack and some that are perhaps fast followers or perhaps even slow followers, and you would expect that in an organisation of 28 countries. It's probably the usual suspects who are the coalition of the willing in terms of being at the forefront of adaptive licensing approaches. It was very kind of Hans-Georg Eichler to mention the UK as being part of that, and we've worked very hard with the UK ecosystem to try and make us the lead runner in many of these new ideas, and we obviously have a strong pharma and biotech base here. But I think it would be fair to say that the Dutch, the French, the Germans would also be amongst that group.
Now, you mentioned payers there, and the price of pharmaceuticals is a very sensitive issue across the world. So what are the implications of these initiatives in terms of how much companies can charge? I mean, the HTAs and the pharmacoeconomic argument needs to be made, but I understand that there might be some flexibility in pricing that this can introduce. Perhaps you could explain a little more about that.
Sure. I think if you look at adaptive licensing, the other side of the coin from adaptive licensing might be coverage with evidence development. And this is something that is not desperately delightful to some of the companies that I would know from my membership. It's not something they've had a fantastic experience of in the past. But I think that what's interesting is that there's an understanding from some of the people that we work with, particularly on the government side of things, that if they are to incentivise innovation, there's a need to do this. I'm not sure I've seen it in practical sense, although there are a couple of examples of things that you could see as ways in which innovation is given a leg up. And if you look at the PPRS scheme in the UK, any products that are launched on the market in the next 5 years are of course available to be free priced with no discount taken back off them. So I suppose that's a positive. But I think, in the same way as we've had a mindset which is that there's a magic moment at which a drug goes from unlicensed to licensed, we're in a mindset that drug prices only go one way, even as the therapeutic benefit is established, and that's down. And I think that there's a recognition amongst regulators, and there's a discussion at least amongst payers about that not being the right way to view innovation. If you're going to incrementally discover and show value, perhaps you need to incrementally be able to improve reimbursement against products. And there is an understanding of that. I can't say I've got 3 examples of products where the prices have gone up by significant amounts in Europe this year, but there are some innovative ideas and some thinking as to how that might be done.
So there's a sense that this initiative led by the UK and others within Europe is really trying to address the fact that the regulatory environment hasn't kept pace with the science as we've gone through the last 20 years and the individualization that's now possible. Is that
I think that's exactly. I think that you're exactly right. If you look at the amount of adverse events it took to pick up signals in drugs that were licensed a generation ago, unfortunately, as we all know with thalidomide, with a very obvious safety signal and a detriment to patients, it took many, many thousands of incidents before that was linked back to a drug, and fortunately after a long period of time it was understood and the issue was addressed. With more recent licensed drugs where there have been problems, they have been discovered far more quickly and with far fewer incidents of patients having an adverse outcome than there were a generation ago. And that's down to the fact that monitoring has changed. It's down to the fact that there's far quicker information systems. And I think that has given, despite those bad outcomes, that's given the regulators confidence that they are able to have a degree of monitoring once a product has been licensed. It isn't just cast on the wind and nobody looks at it again. And that gives them the sense, well, if we're confident in our procedures post-license and we can rapidly move if there's any issues, that's given them the confidence to say, well, perhaps we can then enable products where there is a great deal of benefit, those to be given to patients who want them more speedily. And I think that's what's pulled this through. So I think it's the confidence of those changes over the past generation which has enabled the regulators to move. And perhaps that's where companies are in the following that thinking, and we need to go with it.
So is there a sense that the benefits that would have accrued to companies working in the orphan drugs area are being now reflected in these new, I wouldn't say looser regulations, but more appropriate regulations that are going to bring benefits to a larger part of the community?
I think it's undoubted that the thinking that's been behind some of the orphan drug regulation and some of the experience that regulatory agencies and payers have got through some of orphan drug therapies is now impacting on their thinking more broadly, that they do understand that data sets aren't always straightforward. They have experience, sometimes 10 years experience of these types of drug and therapy, and they're seeing the fact that with segregation of patient populations, the stratification of medicine, the personalisation of medicine, the precision of medicine, targeting, whichever buzzword you like to use, that there is that some of the things learned through orphan drug experience have a greater read across to other types of drug development.
Right, so these sound like some of the high points of the year. Have there been any low points?
I think there's always disappointments where there are companies with therapies that don't reach their expected endpoints. What's always heartening is to see those companies pick themselves back up, or the individuals get to work on new things. I suppose the changes that we've seen in big pharma globally have had an impact in the UK, and I suppose we've seen the closure of some significant R&D in the UK this year, which is always sad to see. But I think what's heartening for me is to see, particularly if you look at the sites in the northwest of England, the vibrancy with which small biotechs have sprung up on the Audley Park site, and the importance of some of the deals that have been done by the biggest farmers in the globe with some of the small companies that have been supported through that so-called Valley of Death by some of the schemes we've been working on. And I'm particularly delighted to see that some of the antimicrobial resistance work done in the UK bioscience base is now being partnered by global corporations. Right.
So I get the sense that for you and your members, the environment is very much opening up. There's a much more positive feel, if you like, than there was maybe 10 years ago, with both the funding that's available to stimulate innovation and a regulatory environment which is, in accordance with that, which is going to help people not only advance medicines from a patient perspective, but actually therefore encourage the investment, because people can see a better return for that investment. Is that reflected in the opinions of your members?
So I think the BIA in the last couple of years, which I've got confidence in talking about, has grown. We've grown by 25%. We're seeing members raising more money. We're seeing them moving their products forward more quickly. I think there's still a challenge in a global environment for the competitiveness of companies from the UK globally. There's still the immense difficulty and complexity of bringing drugs to patients all the way through the process, and there's still many that fail along the way, or can't do it on their own and look to partner rapidly with bigger companies. I think what we're seeing is a real ecosystem approach now. I think we've got academics, we've got big companies, we've got small companies, we've got CROs, we've got a whole range of patient groups, charities, very important funders in the UK, all coming together to tackle some of the biggest problems. And I think there's a buzz around that that perhaps in the nuclear winter of the post-crash years wasn't there. I think we're seeing the maturing of some of the cell therapy work that perhaps has taken some time, and we've seen things like cancer immunotherapy come to being very, very hot very, very quickly in the past period of time, with some excellent UK-based companies right at the heart of the most exciting science there. So I think there's a good feel and a good vibe. Whether it's as heady as the early days of the first ever biotech boom, I'm not sure, and I think it's probably good that it's not, but I think that there is some steady progress being made on some fantastic science with the experience of a generation as to how you can move this forward, bedded into the heart of their companies.
Less heady, but more realistically optimistic.
I hope so.
So you talked there about the kind of strategic benefits going forward. Within the next maybe 12 months, are there any kind of tactical initiatives that you are expecting or are formative in your mind that you're trying to work on and develop?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us in the UK, we're obviously entering a political cycle where there's a general election due in 2015. We're working across the sector to get together some ideas for manifesto, which really is focusing on making sure that we keep the life science sector, biotech, in the minds of the policymakers, and also take this as a moment to reflect for ourselves. We've done very well in advocating for things like the patent box, having R&D tax credits, having the biomedical catalyst, some of these changes in regulatory policy. I suppose what we're trying to do now is take the moment to think, what next? Where do we want to be in 5 years' time? What do we need to do to make this a fantastic environment, and make sure that we've coordinated and have an agenda for the future? I suppose that's what I'll be looking to do in the next 6 months.
Well, Steve, we wish you the best of luck with that, and we look forward to hearing of these developments. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Steve.
You're welcome.